fun, and now we're getting somewhere. Now this movie, this version we've just all seen on DVD, this hasn't been restored yet, so the picture quality still isn't great. The audio is difficult to hear a little bit, and subtitles would have been great. This is one of the few remaining movies that hasn't been restored, that isn't crystal clear, and we just wanted to share that with you. It doesn't matter, this movie was hugely successful for Hitchcock, not just in England, but it broke through in the United States and Canada, and if I'm not mistaken, this is Alfred Hitchcock's most successful British movie. And in my opinion, and I think Diane would agree, it's not his best British movie. That is yet to come, but be that as it may, this one was very, very successful, and I think they had a lot of fun doing it. Speaking of fun, it's interesting to see how he combined humor with tragedy in exactly the same scene, and you saw it right away in one of Diane's favorite scenes where Louis is flirting with the wife and rubbing it into the husband, and so he ties the little bit of yarn, it's probably yarn, to him, and they're off dancing, and they're having a good laugh, and suddenly he's shot dead. And you know, you definitely, you don't see that in a lot, but it's very Hitchcockian. He really did have what some have called an interesting sense of humor. Others have called it a sick sense of humor. It's interesting to note too that he shared this sick sense of humor with Peter Lorre. That you know, obviously when Peter Lorre's English got a little bit better, they would sit and tell stories and share sick jokes with one another. Peter Lorre, just a fantastic villain. We loved every scene he was in. Now Hitchcock did hire him because of what he saw in the movie M from 1931, and he was originally cast to be the role of the sharpshooter. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, the further the filming went on, they realized that he needed to be the main villain because he's just absolutely delightful in every scene as the bad guy, and a really, you know, a good bad guy, dressed well, loves the fine clothes, knows a thing or two about classical music, passionate but definitely evil, and just an excellent bad guy. And interesting too, Peter Lorre played the very first James Bond villain, and for those of you thinking, no, that was Dr. No, and that wasn't Peter Lorre, that's true, that was in 1963 in the movie Dr. No, but in 1954 there was a television adaptation of Casino Royale, and Le Chiffre, the bad guy in that, was played by Peter Lorre. Neat. Interesting in this movie too that you know, you had that moment at the beginning when we're establishing that the mother is a crack shot with a rifle. She misses her shot because she's distracted by when Peter Lorre is showing the young girl his pocket watch. That it's an alarm, it's a bell, and you know, so it distracts her. She misses her shot. Later on, of course, the assassin who won that contest, he misses his shot because the wife screams, and coming full circle where she does not miss her shot and kills that same bad guy. At the beginning of the movie, he says... distracted by a child. Right, yeah, exactly. He also says, I hope we'll match up again, and I can't wait. Well, you know, he met his end with that. So definitely a full circle coming to effect there in that movie. We loved that. Hitchcock had a little bit of dealing with the censors in this one, and that brings up an interesting point, because this is 1934, and although the censors Hitchcock had to deal with at this point were in the United Kingdom, he'll eventually have to deal with the code, the production code, the Hays Code, because in 1934, that was when a movie, if it wanted to be released, had to actually obtain a certificate of approval from these guys, from the production code. And if I'm not mistaken, he'll fight these guys tooth and nail on things that he wants to show. He'll struggle with them, as everyone did. Things that were perfectly okay to show in the 20s and the teens and the early 30s now, suddenly we're all prudish and we can't show any of that. So, but in this particular case, at the end, where the bad guys are all holed up in the church, I guess, and the police are you know, going to get them. That was based on an actual event that Hitchcock knew of called the Sydney Street Siege. It's worth reading up a little bit on Wikipedia. And a similar sort of situation where the police were trying to get these bad guys out. And Hitchcock wanted to show a good old shootout, but the censors would have none of it. The police, London's finest, were not to have anything to do with guns because bobbies don't carry guns, and it was a real mess. So he basically invented that little bit where they say, oh, we'll go to a gunsmith from a few streets over and go borrow some guns. It's just wild to me. I don't know how the bobbies can enforce the law in London without having guns, but that's really what you saw there. If you saw them kind of fumbling for guns, it's because that they really were to have shown no knowledge of weapons. Anything else would be distasteful. So very interesting. The MacGuffin in this one, and we'll see this time and time again, was the big assassination plot. That is the big deal. We never really find out who the target was. We don't know what country he was from. We don't. He was a European diplomat, and we don't know why the bad guys were trying to kill him and what implications that would have. And that's your basic MacGuffin. It's something that everybody is so concerned with, and the audience doesn't care. And certainly it just dwindles off, and we realize that it was just a plot device. This is a perfect example of that. Interesting too, though, that Hitchcock would do this on purpose because he knew that if you made it sort of a current event, then that would fade out as soon as that wasn't interesting anymore from the public. That 10 years from now, people just wouldn't be interested. If you kept it neutral and made it more emotional, made it more about day-to-day, everyday emotions, then the movie would last longer. So I also wanted to say that in that context too, he specifically doesn't show them to be Germans, just as an example. Although there was a mention of the Archduke Ferdinand being assassinated, and of course that led to war with Germany. And we'll see this again in movies down the road, really over the next few years, in the 30s, where clearly the bad guys in the movies are Nazis. But, again with the censors, he wasn't never allowed to say that they were Nazis. They're alluded to as Europeans, bad guys, because at that time, the British government was doing business with Germany and really didn't want to come across as being anti-German or whatever. So you'll pick up on that in movies to come. A quick word about Peter Lorre and the stopwatch. That now, because we've seen this a couple of times, I did notice before that when he was in the room, his stopwatch would go off and make that bell. So at the end it gives him up and they shoot him behind the door because they hear that bell. There's a couple of the times that we realize there he is because of that stopwatch bell going off. In the movie M, where he plays this child murderer, he whistles the same song throughout the movie. So even though you don't see him off screen, you know he's there. If there's a little kid and you see a shadow and then whistling that tune, you know it's the bad guy. So very interesting use of sound in this relatively early sound movie. We wondered why Alfred Hitchcock remade this movie. What was it about this movie that made him want to remake it in 1955 with a much bigger budget and a stellar cast? I suppose we'll find that out. Speaking of stellar casts, pretty much Peter Lorre now is the only guy from all these movies we've seen so far that still have some notoriety today. That people pretty much know who Peter Lorre is, whereas if I'm not mistaken, Herbert Marshall, maybe, because he was in the Bette Davis movie in 1940. There really hasn't been any big stars that are so well known today so far. The piece of music that comes full circle was specifically written for this movie, and you'll actually hear the same piece of music in the remake. So that's interesting, where the cymbals crash and the shot is fired. So we had a blonde, as mentioned, definitely, and she was cool. I mean, let's face it, she saved the day at the end by grabbing the gun from a police officer and making that crack shot. That was cool. We think Hitchcock thought a great deal of women. I mean, let's face it, the women are cool in these movies, and we're going to see a lot of really cool women in these movies. What was the thing you just mentioned? Oh yeah, about the climax happening in an iconic location. There's lots of this in this one. It's happening at the Royal Albert Hall, certainly an iconic location. Something dangerous happening in a theater, we'll see that again and again. And chaos in an unsuspected location, big time here, and certainly at a posh resort in St. Moritz, you don't expect to find a murder, and definitely ordinary people caught up in something and definitely involved in some bigger plot that they were aware of. So definitely lots and lots of Hitchcockian things in this movie. Delightful. There finally wasn't a love triangle. I mean, now we're definitely not having to deal with that. However, as Diane pointed out, we did have at the beginning, a man is going off with my wife, you dirty dog. So there's a little bit of that interesting. It's interesting that the family was a husband, wife, and a daughter. I think there might have been a little bit of autobiographical nature to that, but not that big a deal. And big time with music as a plot device. We'll see that again and again. And this is a perfect example where without the music and sound, there really is no climax in this movie. We wanted to say that the best picture in 1934 is the Clark Gable movie called It Happened One Night. And we've seen this before, but we saw it recently, and just delightful. Really, really good. Weird because nobody involved with the picture wanted to be in it. They thought it was miserable, and it's just amazing how when you're making a movie you have no idea how good it's going to be, because it really is good. It's 80 years old and really, really delightful, so check that one. In addition to the movie M, 1931. It's in German with subtitles, and it's about 20 minutes too long, but really, really worthwhile if you're even kind of a Peter Lorre fan. So that's great. I think that's it. I think we're done. We're happy that we're doing all this with you people out there. We're still loving the comments, and we're really excited on what we're calling Phase 2, where these movies all get really good. And we'll continue with next week, which is the 39 Steps, probably my favorite movie of all of these early movies. You love it too, I think, so we're real excited about that. Okay, so we'll see you next week for that movie, and so from our couch to yours, we'll see you next week.